Well, as my mother used to say, it feels like the world is going to hell in a handbasket. A former president with a mugshot. I never imagined that as an American reality. And the level of political alienation continues to rise to such a degree that few people even agree about the facts of the matter. Reminds me of former Senator Patrick Moynihan famously declaring in a debate with a fellow senator, "Sir, you are entitled to your own opinions, but you are not entitled to your own facts." The entire planet appears to be throwing a temper tantrum in response to its abuse. Droughts and floods, hurricanes, tornadoes, wildfires, extreme weather, these patterns appear to be the only predictable trends for the future. This fragile earth, our island home, is appearing ever more fragile by the day. And to top it all off, in a recent New York Times opinion piece by Nicholas Kristof, you can tell I'm not a native New Yorker because I don't simply say the Times. In a recent Times article, Kristof points to data indicating Americans are losing their religious faith. Now there's a headline that will grab the attention of any member of a large mainline city parish. And of course, it's only one in a series of articles that have appeared on this same topic. Perhaps the two great questions Jesus asked Peter and the disciples in today's gospel reading have never been more germane. Who do people say the Son of Man is? And then, but who do you say that I am? In other words, what are others saying, and what do you believe? Kristof writes, evidence is growing that Americans are becoming significantly less religious. They are drifting away from churches, they are praying less, and they are less likely to say religion is very important in their lives. For the first time in Gallup polling, only a minority of adults in the United States belong to a church, a synagogue, or a mosque. Now, most of the research is on Christians because they account for roughly 90% of believers in the United States. It may not feel that way in New York, but that's a statistical fact. We're currently experiencing the largest and fastest religious shift in the history of our country. Jim Davis and Michael Graham write in a book published this week entitled The Great De-Churching. More people have left the church in the last 25 years than all the new people who became Christians from the First Great Awakening, the Second Great Awakening, and the Billy Graham Crusades combined. About 15% of American adults living today, about 40 million people, have effectively stopped going to church, according to Davis and Graham. 40 million people. You don't really have to try to envision that. You can actually see some of it. Sunday by Sunday, you can see it right here in this church. You can see it in the churches and synagogues and mosques around us. You can see it in your own families, in your children, and in your grandchildren, and in their friends. The pandemic only accelerated trends which have been gaining speed for the past quarter century. If you believe you will never have to say anything to your children or to your grandchildren about the extraordinary value of the Christian faith, about its importance, you have misread the moment. If this trend continues at the same pace, by the mid-2030s, fewer than half of Americans may identify as Christian. Now, you might well ask, how did this happen? I don't think my ordination is entirely responsible for all of this. What caused so many people to the church to separate themselves from being active members of a Christian community? Well, one factor, certainly not the largest factor, but still a significant one which we seldom recall, is that the Christian church lost its pre-1960s workforce of educated women who once worked exclusively at home and volunteered extensively at church. During the 60s and 70s, the vast majority of those women entered the job market, and the church has never fully recovered from the loss of that enormous volunteer and leadership resource. Now, there are various theories for what's behind the struggles of Christianity. Multiple factors are probably at work. One noted by Davis and Graham is that for many people, the church hasn't seemed very Christian. When the Reverend Jerry Falwell dismissed AIDS as God's lethal judgment on promiscuity, he conveyed a sanctimoniousness that in the 1980s and 90s allowed much of the religious right to turn a cold shoulder to the suffering of people with the virus. Jesse Helms, a leader of the religious right in the Senate, even suggested in 1995 that funds for fighting AIDS should be reduced because gay men contract the virus through, quote, deliberate, disgusting, revolting conduct. And a recent survey of non-Christians revealed that most of them evaluated Christians as hypocritical and highly judgmental. Now, that may not be the Christian church you experience, but that's the Christianity they have seen. Christoph observes, in retrospect, the most immoral conduct in America in the late 20th century was not taking place in gay bathhouses, but in conservative churches where blowhards preached homophobia and resisted efforts to counter AIDS, allowing millions of people, gay and straight alike, to die around the world. That is not morally inspiring, unquote. So true. Then in the year 2001, the Reverend Falwell and the Reverend Pat Robertson suggested that the September 11 terror attacks were God's punishment for the behavior of feminists and gay people and secularists. Christoph quips, "My view was that God should have sued them for defamation." Additionally, we can't completely dismiss the effect that progressive theology has had on church attendance. It teaches people we need not fear retribution from an angry God. Our God, we are taught, is a God of grace and love and forgiveness. We no longer believe one is punished for failing to participate in prayer or worship. We don't really believe anyone is going to hell if they're not a part of a church. So the rewards, the carrots for actively participating and believing still exist, but the punishment, the stick, is gone. And I'm unwilling to believe that the only way to get people to be faithful is to try to frighten them. I don't think that's authentic faith. Quote, "The great dechurching finds that religious abuse and more general moral corruption in churches have also driven people away. This is, of course, an indictment of the failures of many leaders who did not address the sexual abuse crisis in their church. But Davis and Graham also find that a much larger share of those who have left church have done so for more banal reasons. Their book suggests that the defining problem driving out most people who leave is just how American life works in the 21st century. Contemporary America simply isn't set up to promote mutuality, care, or common life. Rather, it's designed to maximize individual accomplishment as defined by professional and financial success. Such a system leaves precious little time or energy for forms of community that don't contribute to one's own professional life, or as one ages, the professional prospects of one's children. Workism, a term coined by writer Derek Thompson to describe this phenomena, reigns in America. And because of it, community in America, religious community included, is a math problem that just doesn't add up. Jack Meter observes, a person might be entering mid-career, working a high-stress job requiring a 60 or 70-hour work week. Add that to 15 hours of commuting time, and suddenly something like 2/3 of their waking hours in the week are already accounted for. And so when a friend invites them to a Sunday morning brunch, they may want to go to church, but they also want to see that friend because they haven't been able to see them in months. The friend wins out, unquote. Sound familiar? Our volunteers also spend a lot of time on administration and finances and building issues, and I worry that church volunteers can grow stale without greater spiritual refreshment. Maybe we've forgotten the words of Isaiah. Lift up your eyes to the heavens and look at the earth beneath, for the heavens will vanish like smoke and the earth will wear out like a garment, and those who live on it will die like gnats. But my salvation will be forever, and my deliverance will never be ended. We have busied ourselves with the non-essentials of life. The things we say we most value, we don't actually. We're too often majoring in the minors, and in doing so, we're paying a very steep price in terms of building up our relational and spiritual capital. According to Wendy Cage and Elaine Babchek, religion has historically done 4 main jobs. First, it provides a framework for meaning-making, whether helping our ancient ancestors explain why it rained when it rained, or helping us today make sense of why bad things happen to good people. Second, religion offers rituals that enable us to mark time, to process loss and celebrate joys, from births to coming of age, to family formation, to death. Third, religion creates and supports communities, allowing each of us to find a place of belonging. And finally, fueled by each of the first 3, religion inspires us to take prophetic action, to partake in building a world that is more just, more kind, more loving. They conclude, through the pursuit of these 4 jobs, religious folk might also experience a sense of wonder, discover some new truth about themselves or the world, or even have an encounter with the divine. This is how we make a determination on our own as to who Christ is to us. This is how we are changed, maybe even, God willing, transformed. There's an old story about 3 Christians, a Lutheran, a Catholic, and an Episcopalian. They all end up at the gates of heaven one day. That's where it seems all these jokes happen. St. Peter was off, so Jesus was administering the entrance exam that day. Funny, but bad theology. We'll talk about it later. The question is simple, Jesus said, "Who do you say that I am?" The Lutheran stepped forward and began, "The Bible says," but Jesus interrupted and said, "I know what the Bible says, "Who do you say that I am?" The Lutheran said, "Honestly, I don't know," and fell through a trap door to that other place. The Catholic stepped forward and began, "The Pope says," but Jesus interrupted him and said, "I know what the Pope says. Who do you say that I am?" "I'm not sure," said the Catholic, and promptly fell through the trap door to that other place. And so Jesus turned to the Episcopalian and asked, "Who do you say that I am?" And the Episcopalian replied, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Then, just as Jesus smiled and gestured for the gates to be opened, the Episcopalian continued, "But on the other hand," the question of who Jesus is, not to the world or to the church or to anyone else, but who Jesus is to you individually, is the question of this moment. In other words, what are others saying? And what do you believe? Fortunately, we've each been given gifts uniquely suited for this precise moment. As the Apostle Paul writes in Romans, we have gifts that differ according to the grace given to us: prophecy in proportion to faith, ministry in ministering, the teacher in teaching, the exhorter in exhortation, the giver in generosity, the leader in diligence, the compassionate in cheerfulness. You and I have an opportunity in a moment like this, and we can either lean into it or we can just step back. We can move towards deeper connections to the faith, to the church, to God, or we can take subtle steps backwards until we have moved about as far from our baptismal waters as is possible. Jesus calls us to proclaim, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God," and to proclaim it not only with our lips, but with our lives. The question is, will we? Do we really want